it would be rude for us to merely add and subtract decimals from each other and not give them a chance to be multiplied as well. So we're going to have a lesson today where we do multiply a couple of decimal numbers together. Okay, so hopefully you guys remember your times tables and know how all that stuff works, because that's all you'll need. As long as you can times a couple of numbers together, it's all about your organization and your setting out and just following the steps that we give you. So have a little look at the question on the screen, think about your answer, and once you've picked from A, B, C, or D, you're ready to dive in and get on with things. So let's get into it. The learning intention that we set out for you today is to purely apply your existing multiplication skills to decimal numbers. So what we mean by that is you guys have spent a lot of time multiplying numbers together over the years. Through short multiplication because you know your times tables, and through your long multiplication because you can set your numbers out properly. They're all things we're going to be calling on today. So to be successful, you'll have to learn how to set those sums out properly, because with decimals we do it a little bit differently. And as long as you can put the decimal point in the right place, in the most sensible place in your answer, then you might just get some answers right today. I'm just going to give you a few steps that you could follow to make sure that you're actually doing this right. We have been known from time to time to make you guys sit down in class and write this stuff down in your glossary. So if you want to take this stuff down, just so you don't forget it, right? Not all of these steps involve you actually doing stuff. They're just things that you have to know so you don't stuff up. If you want to take these steps down as you go, that might be a good idea for you. So the first thing you just have to remember is that when you are multiplying decimals together, and well, that's what you're doing today, right? When you are setting out your numbers, like putting one on top of the other one, because that's often how we write down our numbers when we're doing long multiplication, you're not going to worry about lining the decimal points up, okay? Because we do that for adding and subtracting to make sure that we add properly. But with the multiplying of decimals, we break that rule a little bit. Your decimal points might end up lining up on top of each other. All right, so I won't say that you shouldn't be seeing a dot lined up on top of another one, but one of the dots might be over here, it might be over there. You don't worry about lining them up, all right? We're going to show you how to line up your numbers instead of worrying about lining up those dots. Step one was telling you what not to do, right? You don't have to just fixate on lining up the decimal points all the time. Step two is telling you what you have to do, right? So we actually need to line up our digits starting at the right, right? It's like clicking that button in Microsoft Word that pushes everything that way to the right, not to the left where it normally is, but to the other side, right? We want our smallest numbers all lined up together. Right, so if I have a 3.14, a 0.0002, and a 2.5, we do not do this, right? We don't try and line up the dots. What we need to do is get everything over on the right-hand side, right? So I have to put my last numbers lined up together. All right, we won't be asking you to multiply three numbers together in a go. I'm just showing you how they're all lined up. You need to have everything that's the smallest part of it kind of lined up like that, right? So the 4 is lined up with the 2 and the 5, because they're kind of the last numbers in that, and then everything else pushes out from there, right? And the dots didn't line up, and they don't need to line up, okay? So as far as we're concerned, we are imagining the decimal point doesn't exist, just for now, okay? Right? We don't need to worry about the decimal points while we're multiplying. Okay, so now that we've figured out how to actually set out our sums, and that really applies to our long multiplication. When we've got short questions like we do in A and B, we probably don't need to set our numbers out on top of each other, because they are just using our times tables. We're only using numbers less than 12 in this case. If we have big long numbers, we need to set it out as we showed you. But now we're going to get into how we actually multiply with a few steps here at the side. Okay, so step 3, right? Once you've got everything set up or set out, or once you've acknowledged that you don't actually need to set it out, like long multiplication, because you know how to times the numbers together, we're just going to multiply our numbers like normal, pretending that the decimal points aren't there. So what that means is, instead of having a 0.4 and a 0.8, like, you might not know what 0.4 times 0.8 is off the top of your head, that's fine, but most of us should know what 4 times 8 is, right? We pretend the dots aren't there, and we're left with just a 4 and an 8. So because this is really just 4 times 8, we're going to write down the answer to 4 times 8, which is 32. All right, and we'll just do the same thing for B before we move on to step 4. Right, we'll tick this step off. If I get rid of the dots, I've really just got a 12 and a 1. Right, there's nothing after that, nothing after that. It's a 12 and a 1, right? 12 times 1, and 12 times 1 is 12. Okay, so we're just going to multiply as if there are no decimal points there. All right, Now we have to worry, now that we've done this step here and we tick that one off, now we have to worry about where that dot actually goes, because 0.4 times 0.8 can't equal 32, right? A tiny little fraction of a tiny little fraction doesn't equal 32. So what you need to do, right, this step's really, really important, right? We're going to highlight it for you, right? And if you're using your glossary, maybe you highlight this as well, right? Count the number of decimal places in your original numbers. Okay, very, very important. That means across them both. Okay, so we're looking at how many combined numbers there are after the decimal place, right? So here is a number after a decimal place in my first thing that I multiplied, and here is another one. Okay, there was one here, there's one there. So in total, this question has two numbers after the decimal place. So because there were two numbers after decimals, there were two decimal values in these, my answer must also have two decimal values. So I need to just choose where I put the dot to make sure there are two numbers after it, right? So I don't put it here, there wouldn't be anything after it, all right? This is a terrible place to put it. I don't put it here because there's only one number after the decimal place. I put it here because now there's a 3 and a 2. There are two numbers after my decimal place, and that matches the two decimal places that I started with. All right, so let's try that again for this one here. This question here, I've got 1, 2 decimal places in the 0.12. There's 2 there, two numbers after the dot, and there's a number after the dot here as well. All right, so because these two values have 3 combined digits after the dots, 1, 2, 3, so must my answer. So the problem we run into here is I don't have 3 digits to put after my dot, right? If I put the dot right here, I can only ever have 2 digits after it. So what I actually need to do is I just need to squeeze a 0 in there, okay? So if you're falling short of how many digits you need, because I needed to have 3 digits, I put a 0 in there, and now we're okay. All right, so these are the main two steps, right? We've done that for A and B. We'll have a go at this big one in a sec. So to recap, if you need to line your numbers up, like we're going to do in a second, you should do that. Then you just do normal multiplication with normal times tables, right? I just went 4 times 8, and I went 12 times 1. And then I had to decide how many decimal places I needed. And I figured out how many decimal places that was by counting the decimal places in the things that I multiplied together. Right? 2 decimal places in my numbers, 2 decimal places in my answer. 1, 2, 3 decimal places in my numbers, 3 decimal places in my answer. All right, let's have a go at this tough one. All right, so with this one here, because this is long multiplication, I'm timesing by a 53, not by a 1 or a 2 or a 12. Timesing by 53 is hard, so I'm going to have to rearrange this sum. Right, so I'm going to bring the 53 down underneath and just line it up like that. Right, my decimal places haven't lined up, but I've put my backmost numbers together, right? The 7's lined up with the 3. Right, we have to remember how to do long multiplication. All right, before we actually get into it, it doesn't hurt to know in advance how many decimal places your answer will have. This 0.167 has 3 numbers after the dot. The 0.53 has 2 numbers after the dot. So we need to make sure our answer at the end has 5 decimal places in it at the end. So let's practice our long multiplication, which we did right back at the start of the year. So we're going to start by using this 3. Right, this 3 is the thing I'm going to use to multiply everything on the top as I work my way along. So I start right to left, I go 3 times 7. So 3 times 7 makes 21. So we put the 1 down here, and then we carry the 2 from the 21 along the top. Okay, then I have to move along. I've done 3 times 7. Now I'm going to do 3 times 6. So 3 times 6 is 18, plus that 2 that I carried makes 20. Right, we add that carry on. So since it was 20, I put the 0 from the 20 down the bottom, and I put the 2 up the top. And then we need to go 3 times 1, and then add that 2 on. So 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. So there we are. And then 3 times 0 is nothing. We don't need to carry on with this. We don't need to put a dot here either, right? We're not in the business of putting decimal places in our working out. We decide where the decimal place goes at the very end, right? So I'm basically done with using that 3, right? I can move on from that 3. I don't need to multiply by it anymore. I multiplied the 3 by everything up on top. I'm going to move on and use the 5. Before I do, because I'm multiplying by something in the next column across, we put in our magic 0, right? Just to show that we're not timesing by like a 3, or a 5, I should say. We're not timesing by a 5, we're timesing by like a 50 instead, because it's the next column across. So you have to put a 0 there to start off with. Then I can go the 5 times the 7. So 5 sevens is 35. So we put our 5 and we carry our 3. Then we need to go the 5 times the 6, which is 30, and then add the 3, which makes 33. So we can put that 3 there and put another 3 at the top because it was 33, right? The back 3 went there, the first 3 went there. Then 5 times 1 plus 3 makes 8. And we've run out of things to multiply. We've multiplied the 3 all through the top. We've multiplied the 5 all through the top. All we've got to do now is add the results of these together. So from this column, right, we get a 1, we get a 5, we get an 8, and we get an 8. All right, so we are done with the multiplying and the adding side of things. We've just got to put our dot in the right spot. And as I said before, we need 5 decimal places, right? Because we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places there, I'm going to whack a 0 out the front. So now I actually have a 5th place behind the decimal. And I can put it there, right? So my answer was 0.08851. You've done some hard work. Now it's time for step 5. But then it's time for step 6. So sorry to say that all you've got left to make you guys happy and, you know, fulfill, you know, whatever cravings you've got is multiplying decimals, right? We've got a few questions to do on that today, right? They'll be on Google Classroom, they'll be on Mathletics. Have fun.